Afternoon, panelists from DLC, Deloitte, PNC, and from CSL. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to present our case. We also welcome all the students from across the country who are here with us. We hope what we present today is informative and can somewhere add to the change that we want to create. Um, we are students from Carnegie Mellon from different schools of policy, product, and business. Uh, we are over here very excited to present to you what we kind of gathered from the primary and secondary research. And a lot of the solutions have been spoken about in brief, but what we've identified so far is putting them together in a package that can actually make the change out there is the need of the hour. Um, PNC having a major focus on the eastern starboard of the United States has been the focus of our presentation. Now, on 28th January of 2021, the United States ratified the Paris Agreement, which basically made a promise to the world that by 2050 we will be carbon neutral. For that to become a reality, all cars, all buildings, all factories out there have to be carbon neutral. Now, given 22% of emissions coming out today are from residences, it's imperative for our housing to be top notch. Now, 60% of the emissions that come out of these houses is from heating and cooling requirements. And in the Northeast, the majority is fossil fuels, oils that we use. Uh, Even when we talk about houses and residences, they're not all the same. Older houses contribute to almost twice as much as the newer dwellings that we have. And given the median ages of certain houses in cities like Philadelphia at 90 years, that's a big chunk of the population we're talking about. Now, our presentation is not just about the environment, but also about the people. What we found out was that the bottom 30% of Americans were shelling out almost 14% of their income for utility and energy bills. The EPA did a study and they found out that 25 million Americans agreed to foregoing medical and food expenses to pay energy bills. So this is the big problem that we want to solve. If we look about at the pyramid of housing in US, what we find out is that there is 84 million Americans at the very top who have houses paid off for. And then there's this big 40% of Americans in the middle who have houses that have expensive mortgages. And within them, we have 40 million Americans who basically are at or below the median income. These Americans inadvertently also end up leading the housing for the bottom 120 million Americans who live in rental houses. So, if we can target this yellow 120 million Americans and within them specifically the poorer Americans who do not have access to the right financial measures to improve their houses and become green and live affordably, we can tackle a large chunk of the problem. Now, when we talk about these 40 million Americans, what we find out is that there is a massive forces of color discrimination and student debt and medical debt that are all playing into the whole picture, making it more and more difficult for them to basically improve their lifestyle. From these 40 million Americans, we also found out 50% of them were running late in their electricity bills, which kind of helps you visualize exactly the depravity that they are kind of facing at the hour. Uh, it's difficult from an outsider to just visualize the how poverty cycles work. There are poverty cycles of healthcare, there are poverty cycles of education, and then there are also for electricity bills. To help us all visualize exactly what that means for the common man who's sitting out there, think of it like this: you start off with lower income, which basically means you end up living in marginalized communities where housing is poor and old, which basically means you send off so much more of your income in energy bills, which makes you skip on more needs of your life and not be able to service certain debts that you might have to pay off, which again aggravates the problem that you're living in. And this poverty cycle is something that cannot be fixed by just providing a high cost loan to an individual. It has to be a more systematic and fundamental change. I'll hand off to Sadhana for the second part.
Thanks, Arjun. And just looking at the poverty cycle, that's not to say that something hasn't been done about this in the past. We have done extensive research and found out a lot about public housing and also urban development projects that have been done in the US. We're talking about the Cabrini Green Project in Chicago. We're talking about the Queensbridge public housing estates in New York. And there is a reason why the past did not work out for people in the US. It comes out to four major problems: a one size fits all solution, where we're talking about many different cultures, people of different backgrounds and needs, but coming all together in one area just because they're not able to afford other housing. That adds on pressure to a lack of idea generation, no new projects or ideas and companies created. That concentration of poverty in the end just leads to a lot of stigmatization. And of course, that stigmatization is a leading cause of crime in these public housing estates. There's also a point to note that with public housing estates and urban development projects, there is a major lack of formal developers and contractors for electricity, for water, for healthcare. We're talking about schools, a lack of schools. That's a major problem in these areas. Due to that, there is a monopoly of operators, leading to extremely high costs for these individuals. And imagine young students like us who have to pay thousands of dollars out of their pockets for public housing. Of course, that leads to a lack of quality as well. In the end, just because housing estates are extremely expensive to build, it also leads to very extreme and tough measures of collecting the minimal amount of rent that is required out of people. In the end, we identified that the problem with public housing was just a, the wrong reason or the wrong incentive for building these public housing. So we want to make sure that with our solution, we get the incentives right. Three things that we're going to make sure of in the end of this: that the environment comes out greener, the customer and users like us who are living in these housing estates are financially better, and of course, banks such as PNCs are profitable in the end as well. During our research, we came up with two large customer personas, and they're not just looking for cheaper homes in the end. They want a safe space, not just for themselves, but for their future families and growing growing regions as well. Starting with Matthew, he's a resident of Chester in Pennsylvania and a father of a 3-year-old. He struggles with the idea of a low income, of course. They bought a house just because it was affordable, but in the past, he had his mortgage denied and in the end had to put his entire savings plan as a collateral. We also note that he has to pay extremely high utility bills because he lives in an area near toxic waste, and the lighting and heating in his house is just unsustainable in the end. Moving on to Sarah, she graduated 6 years ago and still continues to have an extremely high student debt along with her husband, also living in Pennsylvania. And the problem that she goes through is just the lack of good sustainable appliances. The area that she's living in is extremely flood prone, and it just leads to extremely high rental utility costs for her and her husband. I'd like to pass on to Bruce, who will take us through our two unique solutions.
Thank you, Sadhna. So going toward the solutions, our team developed a two-step approach to tackling unaffordability and unsustainability of housing. First, we would push for an education-based initiative to improve financial literacy around these impactful housing topics. We call this first step fiscal for being financial instruction and strategies for community advancement and literacy. Next, we hope to reduce costs for greenifying current homes with House, aka homeowners optimizing utility savings and efficiency. So first, I'll dive more into fiscal. So fiscal is all about financial literacy, and the perfect partner for this initiative is Annuity, a trusted source for personal financial information. PNC can partner with Annuity to offer financial literacy mentorship programs, workshops, and seminars to help explain concepts of finance and housing. Fiscal will help parents like Matthew and his kid better prepare. We opt for a multifaceted approach to launching fiscal. Not all of these 4 initiatives will happen right away, as we'll demonstrate later on with our expected timeline. However, we believe it is imperative to reach these underserved communities in several ways, from community centers to local schools, parenting organizations, community leaders, and relevant social media. Now let's dive into the key components of fiscal. The value proposition of fiscal is a financial literacy service with quality content and is differentiated by the key partnerships like Annuity and commitment to serve these underserved groups. Our pricing strategy for fiscal is to be highly subsidized, low cost, or free offerings to ensure that the program is accessible by those we are trying to serve. As I mentioned before, fiscal should be launched with both a digital and in-person presence and have a multifaceted marketing approach for promotion. So moving on to House. The second part of our solution is House, which is an initiative to provide low-cost loans to low-income families like Matthew or Sarah to improve their homes and make them more sustainable through solar panels or electric heating and the like. This will help break the cycle of low-income families struggling with unsafe and energy-inefficient housing. Furthermore, these loans would explicitly give PNC the rights to RECs, which are renewable energy certificates, specifically not carbon credits, from the generation of renewable energy from the housing improvements to offset the cost of offering these loans. From our financial modeling of the solution, we believe that PNC could have additional profits of $40 million a year while simultaneously tackling the difficult problems of unaffordable and unsustainable housing. So we consulted a renewable energy expert to validate the crux of our house solution, which is renewable energy credits, or RECs. He stated that implementing and owning solar panels on homes could provide PNC with RECs until the investment is recouped, similar to a mortgage structure. Additionally, we chose to focus on RECs over carbon credits because the expert felt that home improvements wouldn't qualify for carbon credits. Feel free to ask us more. So the first step to house rollout is to identify the communities and even the specific houses in need of sustainable improvements by working with housing authorities and utilities. The second step is to promote awareness of the program, which can utilize the networks built by the fiscal initiative to introduce the house program in info sessions or workshops to introduce established by fiscal. Finally, key partnerships include solar panel providers and contractors, energy and utility companies with green initiatives like Duquesne Light, and other environmental organizations. The value proposition of House is to utilize renewable energy credits to enable PNC to provide underserved communities with green housing improvements. Our pricing strategy for House is to offer low-interest loans and emphasize long-term savings for customers. As I mentioned before, House will focus on communities in need of housing improvements, and we will reach those communities through the work done by fiscal. Now to get into risk mitigation, financial modeling, and timeline, I'd like to hand it off to Ashan.
Thank you, Bruce. We all expect that it would be smooth sailing, but it's unlikely. So we've listed down some of the risks that we might face for both of our projects and the mitigation strategies. I'll just briefly touch upon them so that we can move on to the numbers. But the most likely, hindrances could be that accessibility. People of color, who would be one of our primary targets, are 3 times more likely to suffer from physical and mental disabilities. And if our content is not accessible for them, it won't work, which is why we need to partner with experts in the field. Similarly, the effectiveness of the education. So we would want to follow the NCEE standard. We don't require to, because this is our own proprietary knowledge, but we would want to follow that so that the quality is maintained. Similarly, this is a constantly evolving space with new laws coming in all the time, which is why we would want to constantly test our trainers just to be sure that no wrong information is passed on to the customers. For House, the price of RECs fluctuates a lot. One way to go about improving that is diversification. If we diversify across states and not just restrict ourselves to Pennsylvania and not just restrict ourselves to solar, that would be one way to do it. And this is a capital-intensive project, which is why the tax credits offered by the government are really helpful. Now, moving to the financial benefits to both the stakeholders, the customer and PNC. For the customer, there is a huge upfront cost of retrofitting, buying solar equipment. There is a huge interest on loans when they go to the market. It's upwards of 8% as per our research. Here's where the federal tax credits would help and the savings from the energy bill would save. The savings would come in, energy savings. Now, with our proposal, the customer is able to recoup the entire amount in just 9 years. And over the 30-year life cycle of the solar panels, they're able to essentially earn upwards of $33,000. When it comes to PNC is giving these low-interest loans to people with a high risk score, essentially a low credit rating. So there definitely is a cost of funds associated. When they could get 8% on the market, they're essentially just giving it away for 2.5% in our model. But that is still okay, even though the customers might have higher defaults because of the RECs. Now, based on our calculations in our model, which we would love to go on in the Q&A and discuss in detail, PNC needs to set aside just $1.7 billion to acquire 100,000 customers in all of Pennsylvania. That is not a big number. That is less than 2% of Pennsylvania's population because there's 5.7 million households. Earn $50 million from RECs and earn a net profit of $40 million. And the effective return on these loans is 2.3%, which is a lot more than the return on assets for PNC at 1.1%, and a lot more than the return on loans, if we can call that a metric, which is nearly 1.9% for all of PNC's businesses. And 1.7 billion might seem like a big amount, but considering PNC's loan book, which is upwards of $320 billion, it is not a lot at all. This is a timeline that we've created over 6 quarters. We spent the first quarter just budgeting, planning, negotiating with our partners, and then eventually rolling it out. So in conclusion, our solution, it provides both PNC, it is a sustainable business model, provides better returns to PNC, provides better life for the customer, and it all happens while making everything good for the planet, everything greener. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm having a little bit of difficulty with the financial literacy part. How is educating your personas going to help them increase their income? Because that's the problem, not necessarily that they don't know, it's that they can't stretch that money with the cost of living.
I can just introduce. Yeah, I'd like to take that up. So the assumption is through our personas and the research that we've done, we learned that a lot of low-income, marginalized communities, including people of color, just don't have access to the right tools and technologies to understand how much they would even need to save in order for example, Matthew to have a good, healthy environment for his kids. He's just not aware of where do I put my money, where should I invest, or how can I make my home more sustainable. And also just adding on top of that, the idea is that in the long run, we hope to sort of break that cycle off by providing, starting with youngsters especially, giving them access to more knowledge so that they can, in the end, just become financially more literate.
So I'm going to push back on that. I don't think it's about, oh, I know I have enough money, I just don't know where to put it, right? So the personas that you had, one was like $48,000, right? That's not enough for their cost of living. So there is not enough to invest or save. So the question is, how is educating them and saying, when you magically get more money, this is where you should put it?
I think that's a very valid question, and I understand the depth of what you're implying. What we were trying to do when we were financially modeling, and this is where RECs really came into the picture, was if we can effectively lower the cost of operating and owning the house, retrofitting and upgrade to zero for the current tenant, for the current homeowner, that was our effective goal. What PNC on the other hand gets is this distributed solar farm that allows it to generate all of these RECs and make money. So by distributing the loan risk for interest free, almost interest free, PNC is not really making much money. PNC is making money by the RECs that we are creating from all of these different households, from the solar panels that are being put atop Matthew's house, for example. Matthew himself, over the course of the life of solar panel, is effectively not shelling out any money. When we think about the $800 a year he's going to save from the energy bills, the federal tax rebates that will come in from purchasing all of these things, and actually sending some money back into the grid, he is basically going to be cost positive and not negative.
Yeah, $30,000, over $30,000 over 30 years, which the customer would not have known had PNC not educated them.
I just want to add on that I think a large part of what we were talking about at the beginning mentions what you were saying about how there's this cycle, and it has to do with the starting point is that low income. And I think the point of fiscal is maybe sort of a platform for PNC to engage with these communities and offer, including house as one program, but many, if PNC has other solutions or initiatives that they'd like to offer, that could be a way to engage with those communities. And yeah.
Can you give a little more background on the RECs? It seems like a really big part of this program. I'm not familiar. How does this originate? Does PNC already have them? That kind of thing.
So RECs are offered when you generate renewable energy. So for every 1 megawatt hour of electricity produced, you get 1 REC against it. And so I think we can go through the model. Right? Yeah. I'll just show it over here.
But just before we get into the model, the key idea is you have these polluters, these big industries and big tech who are kind of polluting the environment, and they basically want to be carbon neutral. So they purchase these RECs from the people like us who are creating renewable energy-based electricity, and they basically get to say, oh, I put 2 tons of CO2 out, but I bought these RECs, so effectively my carbon footprint is zero. So it's a way of taxing the polluters out there. And what we are trying to do is distribute this creation of this renewable energy in these RECs to kind of get money into the pool from the polluters out there. So at the end of the day, if you ask me who's footing this entire bill, it's going to be the polluters and the big oil probably out there who's footing the bill for all of this effort.
And just one key difference I'd like to point out between RECs and carbon credits. RECs are earned by agencies such as United States Environmental Protection Agencies. They can be earned by individuals, by companies such as PNC, for every time a renewable energy is generated. So for example, if PNC invests in the solar panels, excuse me, for homes, and every time a kilowatt of energy is produced through those, PNC earns an REC. The difference with carbon credits is just that RECs are earned and carbon credits are bought or sold.